Hello everyone. Today, Professor Nikhilesh Sinha from UK. He is the global thought leader in development economics and housing policy, and he has the rigorous research with socially responsible education and deeply analytical and transformative session. This session is, and we will have practical wisdom for inclusive urban growth, and also we will have a interdisciplinary policy thought from the professor. And thank you very much, Professor Nikhilesh Sinha, for this invitation and for joining this and for your time. And first of all, just if you can briefly explain your journey, how this journey was and how it was, so that we can then start some specific questions from you, please.
Thank you, Habib. Thank you so much for inviting me and for this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Also, hopefully be useful to your listeners. I grew up in India. I was born in Calcutta, but I grew up in a city called Hyderabad. And my journey, like many scholars from the global south, began with education in India. I studied economics at University of Hyderabad. I did my master's there. I did an undergraduate degree in economics, statistics, and logic in my undergraduate studies, and then I did a master's in economics. And then, like many young scholars, I was looking for opportunities to widen my understanding and also to get an international perspective. So I did a master's in law and economics at the universities of Hamburg and Bologna. So I got a European scholarship, Erasmus scholarship, to go and attend a law and economics program. And then actually, I decided that I wanted to go back to India to really understand from a grassroots level what was going on in the country. Because one of the problems in academia is as you get further and further into your studies, sometimes you lose touch with the reality on the ground. You begin to think about things in a theoretical perspective, but ultimately my interest was in helping in the process of development, understanding what was holding people back, what was creating the disparities between rich and poor, what was preventing people from taking access to opportunities, improving their own lives, but also contributing to the development process overall. Because ultimately, I see development as a common good. It's not something that is only about you getting richer. It's about your creating those environments that then help other people as well. So as we all progress, that should make it easier for everyone else also to use those infrastructures, to use those networks, to use those ways of doing things. So I have a background in economics, but I've studied law and economics, and then my PhD was at the Development Planning Unit in London, which is the Bartlett is one of the foremost schools of urban planning and architecture. So it was a very interdisciplinary program. I got to talk to political scientists, to architects, to planners, because one of the shifts that happened when I went back to India in the late 2000s, 2005, 2006, 2007, one of the main things that was happening around I was in Andhra Pradesh. So at that point, Hyderabad was the capital of Andhra Pradesh, undivided Andhra Pradesh. It's then split in 2014 into two states. But so Andhra Pradesh was, like many states in India, there was a large rural population. And what we were seeing is a huge issue with household indebtedness, with the problem of people taking agricultural loans, not being able to pay back. And so this is where my focus was very much on rural credit and rural credit programs. I had looked at in my master's program, I'd looked at in Europe, I'd looked at agricultural policy in Europe, maybe to learn a little bit about how countries that came into the EU had reorganized their agricultural policy in order to get to a stage where they could join the EU. So we're looking at countries like Estonia, Slovakia, Poland, countries that then became success stories. So my approach has always been to try and learn how things are done, and then to see how they can be implemented in different ways, while understanding that the uh, core grassroots problems and culture, etc., are going to be different in every place. So you can't just transplant things. So focus on rural and agricultural, and then I began to see that really the big changes were happening in the cities. Urban development was really driving GDP per capita. It was driving employment. The rural areas were largely left behind, right? So one question is, why is there such a big disparity between rural and urban? All the infrastructure, all of the investment is going to urban areas, not into rural areas. So I started shifting my focus into okay, so if cities are where things are happening, how do we understand urban development? And that's where my PhD came from saying, having understood some of the issues within the rural areas, to try and see, when people are moving from the rural to the urban, what is actually happening? How are they getting access to housing? How are they getting access to a better livelihood? What are the skills required, etc.? So I worked, actually, prior to starting my PhD, I worked at the Indian School of Business, leading a project on something called, it was an affordable housing and urbanization project, which was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And that was where I began to really see what the issues were, the real problems of housing and things. So I've already got a little bit ahead of myself. I don't know if you want to come in with some questions.
No, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And Professor, how institutional theories shape our understanding of urban development? What do you think about this?
Sure. So firstly, I think we need to just step back and say, what do I mean by an institution? It may be a term that people understand, they don't understand. Usually in the common thing, when we say institution, we think university, bank, these are all institutions, the firm. But institutions are all around us, right? Institutions are the rules and the structures that surround us in society. So for instance, money is an institution, right? Why is money an institution? Because money does not have any intrinsic value, but we all accept that money is something that we can use to exchange things. And so looking at things from the perspective of institutions makes us recognize that almost everything around us is something that humans have built, and we have built in cooperation with each other. So actually, institutions are fundamentally about how human beings cooperate with each other to do things. So in that broad sense, without understanding how these institutions work, it's very hard to understand the process of development, whether it's urban, rural. So we have formal institutions and we have informal institutions. So my master's in law and economics was about understanding the formal structures and regulations. That's the institutional structures that maybe create the incentives for the market to work in some ways or the other. The informal institutions are things that are deeply embedded within cultures. So for instance, if you come from South Asia, then caste, religion, all of these are structural institutions that are also important in understanding how outcomes come about. So understanding both the interaction between the formal and the informal institutions is really important in any kind of development. In urban development, it's about understanding how cities manifest those different institutional forms. Why do planning laws work in certain ways? There are high level plans, but when you get to what's happening on the ground, you need to take into account politics. You need to understand the sociology of how people are interacting with each other. So there is no level playing field. There are all of these different things that are intermediating. So institutions really opens up a way of analyzing these different structures.
Very nice. That's good. And what are the most persistent barriers to affordable housing in emerging economics?
So I think there's a number, and some of these are common across both developing and so-called developed countries. Land value is one of the big issues. The most expensive part of housing is the value of land. And there's a reason for this, because actually urban land value is linked with what amenities you have access to. So cheap land will be in the outskirts where you don't have access to transport, you don't have access to sanitation, you don't have access to all of the amenities that make city life better, right? And so there's a kind of twin process. As a neighborhood gets more established and better connected and more desirable to live in, it also gets more expensive. And so what happened in the 50s and 60s was across the world, people were building housing for poor people. They were moving them from so-called slums into outskirts of the city because that's where it was cheap, without taking into account that you were cutting these people off from their relationships, from their networks, from access to education, access to healthcare, access to jobs. All of this becomes difficult as you push people out. So one of the biggest problems that nobody really has been able to solve is this question of how do you deal with urban land, right? Very briefly, I'll give you one example of something that has been used in South Africa, for instance, in a couple of other places. There's something called land value capture. Land value capture is this idea that as you build infrastructure, and it's usually public money that's building this infrastructure, so roads or whatever it is, generally the private sector is benefiting from the provision of public infrastructure, right? And that value gets captured by private players and not really shared socially. So one of the ways in which you can deal with this is to say, okay, the government has used taxpayer public money to build this infrastructure. Now we're going to try and ensure that any private sector companies that are benefiting from this increase in value of land, this can be recaptured into public money. So you create a feedback mechanism where the public value creation is not just absorbed by private players, but in practice it's a little bit more difficult to do, but it's being tried out, and there's some good success stories around how that can be used.
Very nice. That's good. And Professor, could you please share about the insights from your Rockefeller, that was the funded research housing
Sure,
project?
sure. So we had a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, which is really about looking, in fact, at how the private sector can provide low-income housing. So just to tell you a little bit about the context of that, and this is most governments in most countries up to the 70s, 80s were engaged with public housing policy, where they were trying to build and operate public housing. From the 90s onwards, particularly with the influence of organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, many of the countries that went under structural adjustment programs where they took loans, they had to privatize a lot of things. And one of the things that got privatized in many countries was housing provision. So in many, many developing countries, the primary drivers of housing supply are private. And so the government plays a very small role, sometimes subsidizing, sometimes doing certain things. So our question was very much, how can the private sector deliver low-income housing? Is there an economic model? Is there a revenue model where we can create social impact while also creating some amount of profit? Is there a private play there? So that's what the project was about. We spent about 2 years looking at different private housing projects around. One of the things that helped us actually was, this was 2009, 2010. This project was actually started in 2011. What happened with the financial crisis was a sudden realization by companies that the luxury sector was actually quite risky. So with a global recession, what happens is that the top end of the market gets hit hardest. The people with that much money, those are the ones who've lost jobs in finance and other sectors. And so they started looking for more sustainable models, where they were looking at who are the people who are going to need housing regardless of what's going on in the economy, right? And that's where you get into low-income housing. You realize that there is a huge number of people who need housing, and their desire to buy a second or third house doesn't even come up, that's where the luxury sector is, where people are buying multiple properties, who might stop buying, and so the growth in that sector got curtailed, and so we were looking really at the bottom. And so what we found is that there are very interesting models for private sector housing delivery, but they tend to be again in peripheral, peri-urban areas, and that's because that's where you have cheap land. And so the short answer, coming back to what I was saying earlier, is the only way that you can have low-income housing in the center of cities is if there is some subsidization model for that land. There's no other way to deliver affordable housing in that capacity. So land is really the key problem in cities.
Yes, yes. So subsidies from the government, I think so. This is the main core thing. And how does your work connect economic theory with the ethical global citizenship?
Okay, so this takes us a little bit in a different direction. See, economics is finally a discipline that is asking questions about how different aspects of society work together, right? So the broader framework of economics is understanding an economy that is about different types of players. You have the state, you have financial players, you have households, you have all of these different aspects, and we're looking at how the interrelation works. As you broaden that and start thinking about the economy not just as an isolated entity, but something that is interconnected with the rest of the world, you start seeing that none of us are disconnected from the world. Every time you buy something, you're buying something that has probably passed through several borders. It was maybe manufactured in Bangladesh, it was maybe manufactured in Turkey, you could be sitting in the Netherlands, or you could be sitting in the UK. But when you buy something, you are connected through a global supply chain. And so fundamentally, production and consumption is no longer something that is localized, even though there are some movements towards that. Most of us are consuming global commodities. So business, finance, people, these are all affected by globalization, particularly with new technologies. Globalization is speeding up. The question is, how can we act ethically within this framework? How do we think about our buying decisions? How do we think about our manufacturing decisions? How do we think about our regulations? Keeping in mind that anything that we do is affecting people across the world. So we can no longer, even though there are political movements that are trying to close us off, what we saw, for instance, with COVID, is that, you cannot close off yourself from what is happening in other parts of the world. We are all going to be continually affected by each other. And so how do we operate in that global environment? And global citizenship is one framework which asks that question. How do we act ethically, both as consumer, as well as producer, as well as government?
That's nice, good. And Professor, what are the practical challenges in implementing housing policies in, you could say, the peri-urban areas or something like that?
So, you mentioned subsidies earlier, and the big problem with subsidies is how do you police them? How do you see if somebody's actually doing what they're doing? So I'll tell you a short story about something that happened. It's a famous case. It happened in Mumbai. There was a private developer who got access to some land, very, very cheap, subsidized land, and was given that land. I think they paid something like less than 1/10 of a pound per acre or something. It was a very, very cheap price, particularly because they were going to use that to produce affordable housing. But the problem is that the way that affordable housing was defined was by square foot area or square meter area. So they built these small units which were considered for the low income groups, because no wealthy family would buy a small unit like that, right? But what they did very cleverly was that they made 4 units like that next to each other, and then once the project was completed, they just knocked down the walls between them and then sold them as high income housing. So these are the facts that we need to face, especially in countries where regulation is, there's corruption, there's different ways people can get around it. So there's always this issue about what you think about in theory, but what you do in practice. And so you need to really think through how that policy is how going to land. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, that's thought provoking. Yeah. And Professor, how can interdisciplinary approaches can strengthen urban planning frameworks?
Sure. I mean, urban planning by itself is an interdisciplinary kind of field. You need to understand policy, you need to understand you need to understand some economics, you need to understand some politics, you need to understand some architecture, you need to understand some planning. So it is by itself a interdisciplinary field. But the problem, as usual, is we all talk slightly different languages, right?
Yes.
So as an economist, I'll talk about demand and supply. The political person will talk about what is the political capital, what is the structures by which policy is going to be implemented, who are the stakeholders, what are the players. So interdisciplinarity, I think, is important because every field brings with it a specific way of thinking about something. So one example I often use with my students is going back to the idea of global citizenship. Nobody is a global citizen, you know. Habib, you're in Durham right now. You spent some time in China, but if I ask you who are you, where are you from, you will give me an answer which is to do with your cultural roots, maybe, or you might give me a different answer. We never lose our identity. We don't become some kind of global creature. But what we do is every place we go to, we learn something. And I think the most valuable thing about interdisciplinarity is to pick up those lessons and think of yourself as a global traveler going back home. What do you carry back with you? How does it help you see where you live? How does it help you see how you do things? So interdisciplinarity doesn't mean you lose your discipline. It means that you learn new ways of seeing things which you bring back to enrich your own practice and your own discipline.
Very great. That's great. Wonderful. And Professor, one thing, for example, what roles does business education play in shaping development discourse, something like that?
So see, I mean, to tell you the truth, there's always, people say that don't politicize things. But the truth is that politics is everywhere. Politics is about power, it's about who has the ability, the right to do things. And businesses have a lot of power. Um, the example I gave before was of a business that circumvented the rules, but we also have global businesses that have changed the way that we do things. In some ways, um, the fact that we are able to access technology, the fact that now more people have access to the internet than ever before, yes, a lot of this was through public funding, but much of it was through private innovation as well, right? And so we need to understand how we can use the energies of the private sector as well as public sector. And so urban planning is finally about building cities, and cities contain businesses, they contain restaurants, they contain schools, they contain different kinds of institutions. And so what the business lens makes us understand is ultimately businesses cannot survive if they do not generate revenue. We need to think about sustainable ways, viable ways. But at the same time, we need to guard against those businesses only capturing that value for themselves and effectively acting against the interests of the other residents of the city. So there's always an interplay. But I think business education is very, very important to understand how different interest groups behave, react. It also gives you a language with which you can talk to businesses and say, okay, we're trying to build something together. This will benefit you as well. So it's about learning that language. It's about learning the ways in which people think in business, and then taking that entrepreneurial energy and in fact using that to push forward urban planning as well.
That's great. And how did your experience at UCL influence your teaching and research trajectory?
So, I mean, I have to say, University College London, UCL, is one of the leading research universities in the world. It's currently in the top 4 or 5. And I think the thing which I was already drawn to, but became much more present in my time at UCL was my ability to be able to engage with people from other disciplines and other departments. So it's really a global hub for different kinds of research. And so it meant that if I was working on a project and I wanted to talk to an engineer, I could just walk across to the engineering department and say, hey, I'm doing this. Can we have a conversation? And I have to say, in most cases, people were extremely cooperative, receptive. So for me, that was a hugely life-changing experience, having that ability to be in a global university where you had people from all over the world, but also working on different aspects, which you could have a conversation with.
Nice, inspiring. And what was the mission, and what is the mission of WINSIR Young Scholars Program, and how
Sure.
can others can engage with this year?
Sure. So WINNER is the World Interdisciplinary Network of Institutional Research. There is an annual conference every year. That's the main conference. This year it's happening in Prague, but it's in different parts of the world. Last year it was in Pittsburgh in the US. WINNER has one simple mission, which is to bring together people working on institutions. So whatever field you're in, if you're interested in institutional theory, there is a space for you. WINNER Young Scholars, which I founded along with two wonderful members, co-directors of the WINNER Young Scholars Program, is to create a platform for young scholars doing their PhD or maybe in a postdoc to get access to networks, to get access to advice, to get access to mentorship from senior scholars. So we run two programs. One is an online conference. The last one was on artificial intelligence in institutions that happened in May. And the next one is our pre-conference. So the day before the main conference, we have fully funded. We get about 12 scholars from different parts of the world to have a day. So this is every year we have two. One is an online and then one is an in person. And this is really to create a platform for young scholars to be able to further their work, get advice, including how to publish, how to get ahead in the job market.
That's nice. And Professor, what's the criteria to select those researchers? I mean, the advice so that the researchers can equip themselves with those skills or those abilities, something like that.
Sure. So we have a call for papers every time. So we publicize this usually about a month or 2 months before. So you send in an abstract. We don't need you to send in a whole paper. And then there's a selection committee. We go through that and we rank them by quality. I have to say it's a very competitive process. Last time we received 60 applications. We could only take 8 for the online conference. But I think the skills are really about being clear about the research that you're doing, having a clear link with institutions, being able to articulate yourself in 300 words. That's the key thing.
That's nice. And overall, for example, the qualities of the researcher, do you think they should have to be part of your team, or as a whole, the team of any professor?
So look, I mean, expertise in your discipline is obviously key. Nowadays, what has happened is there's a lot of emphasis on how do you speak to the public as well as your own community. And I think that's something that we're seeing more and more. So understanding your discipline is good, but being able to talk to people in other disciplines, but also to the general public, is becoming more important. So I think alongside the hard skills of your discipline that you learn, communication is key. How do you write for a general audience? I would recommend all researchers to start not just publishing in journals, which of course we should do, but also to have other ways like you're doing through your podcast and other things to try and create a presence where you have an audience and where you're building that and communicating with the public.
Nice, that's nice. And Professor, what the research areas do you think in your field in this? These are the hot areas, and the young researchers can focus on this in their master degree, PhD degree, and postdoc, something like that.
I mean, across the board, I think we need more emphasis on new ways of doing things, particularly through sustainability, through addressing the climate crisis, new forms of energy stuff that you're doing. But along with that, we need new models of governance. We need new ways of kind of building collaborations between different parties. So there's a lot of work to be done in what are the institutions of the future? How do we navigate global problems which have local effects? So those are two very key aspects. But ultimately, there is a key thing. Don't go into a master's program that you think is going to be uh, you know topical just because it's topical. Do something that you have a deep interest in, because it's only then that you'll be able to really drive and push forward. So right now, there's always buzzwords. So right now, AI is the buzzword. So everyone will be doing masters in AI, but ultimately, you need to think about what angle you're going to take. So be strategic, but also think about what is it that drives you. So be true to things that you find relevant to yourself, that you'll be interested in, because it's very hard to excel in something you have no interest in. You should have a baseline interest in what you're studying.
Very nice. And global problem and local effect. That's very interesting to focus on this. And Professor, thank you for this. And final advice and final comments before ending this session, please.
Sure. I mean, firstly, I want to say thank you so much for organizing this. It's been an interesting discussion. I hope it was useful to your viewers as well as to you. I think the final thoughts are that we are at the moment in a period of uncertainty. There are new technologies. AI is changing our lives. We have, the political structures around us are also under kind of change, threat, however you look at it. So it's a very interesting time to be alive. But ultimately, we need to find solutions. We need to be optimistic, and we need to, I think, focus really on. Don't get distracted. There's a lot of stuff in the media. There's a lot of stuff on social media that is constantly pulling you in this way and that way. But I think having a focused approach is really important. So while it's easy to get lost in the media dialogue, it's important to really, one, know what is real and not real. So have key ways of combating disinformation and misinformation, one of the big challenges, and building on those strengths.
Very nice. Focused approach in this media misinformation. That's a professor. Really, we are thankful to you. You are definitely the renowned economist and interdisciplinary scholar, and also you are expert in housing development and in institution theory, and especially you. What you shared, that the practical steps, how to intersect theory and practice, definitely. And you are definitely the champion, or you are preaching this, I think so, the ethics and the global learning something, and this visionary education and that's policy thinker. This is what you have the qualities, and hope we will get maximum benefits from you, and hope to see you again in future as well. Thank you very much for your time and for this discussion, and have a blessed journey.
Thank you. You too, Habib. Thank you very much.